Think Cecil B. DeMille. Think surround sound. Think whatever the latest technology is that jumps us out of our seats at the cinema. Think the Ring of the Nibelungen. The passage from the Old Testament, from the first book of the Kings, is one of the great dramatic set pieces of the Old Testament, indeed of the scriptures altogether. The whole of the narratives about Elijah have something of this quality about them. They're all larger than life, astonishing great events. But this is larger than life with a sting in its tail. To get the real value of this particular episode, you've got to know what goes before and what comes after. Elijah, the prophet of the Lord, is at his lowest ebb, up against Ahab and Jezebel. The worship of the true God is no longer active. They've just managed to massacre all the other prophets and priests of the Lord. He alone, as he think, is left, and he is running for his life. He fetches up at a cave in the holy mountain, and the word of the Lord comes to him and says that the Lord will speak to him. Of course, the Lord has spoken to him throughout his ministry as a prophet, but this is different. The Lord will speak to him directly, not mediated through an angel or some other emanation. It's a very clear principle of Judaism that it was not possible for God to speak to you directly. If he did, you would die. You could not possibly bear the unmediated presence of God himself. But that's what's been promised. And so, in the cave, there are these terrific emanations. Think, I don't know, the paintings of Jonathan Martin, something like that. Huge, supernatural events. A great strong wind rends the mountains apart. It's like the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit, something like that. All that CGI can do. But the Lord was not in the wind. Then after that, a terrific earthquake. The Lord is not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And then finally, a still, small voice. And that is the very presence of God. Elijah wraps his face in his mantle, in his cloak, because he dare not look on God. So God, the presence of God, the very absolute, unmediated presence of God, is more like a still, small voice than these terrific, dramatic disasters, emanations, and all the rest of it. It makes me think of all those people, all those conversations I've had throughout my ministry about how there clearly isn't really anything like God, because these my interlocutors, they've never heard a voice speaking to them. They've never witnessed a miraculous cure from an illness. They've never seen something terrific and splendid. And perhaps you haven't either. Perhaps I haven't. But we've all heard the still small voice. It's there, inside us. Sometimes it's the voice of inspiration. Sometimes it's the voice of insight. Perhaps most of all, it's the voice of conscience. That small voice which tells us what is the right thing to do. That small voice which tells us that that last action, or those last words, weren't perhaps so very clever after all, and that we could do better. God comes to us today as he came to Elijah all those centuries ago in the still, small voice. And if we set out only waiting for the earthquake and the fire and the rocks to be split in twain, then our ears and our hearts and our minds will be so attuned to supernatural and terrific effects that we never actually hear the true and real voice of God. A still small voice. Well, that's not much of an answer to Elijah's wish to die because his work was clearly utterly wasted. Well, the still small voice was enough. Read on when you get home, because God said, you're not alone. There's several hundred others. You're not by yourself. And what's more, you will prevail. You're actually going to turn the whole fate of Israel and Judah around from this moment. You will proceed. You will anoint new kings, and the whole thing will change. The still small voice, it still speaks, if only we will hear it. Amen.